All right, guys, we're talking about addiction, dopamine, and how this impacts quality of life. And to me, I've seen this impact a significant amount of people. And the idea here is really to give some education about the biology of addiction and also some concepts as to maybe what people can do, right? So this hopefully helps people improve their quality of life as it does for me. I'm still working on it. There's a lot I also have to work on, and we'll discuss that soon. So first, what is dopamine? It's a neurochemical in the brain. People know this as like a reward chemical, but more specifically, it's the anticipation of a reward. We actually have studies that show that you get more dopamine from the anticipation of a reward than sometimes even the reward itself. So the dopamine is actually a motivator. It's not just a reward idea, it's a motivator to get the reward, which is good. In nature, you're motivated to get food, to go hunting, right? This is really important as a proper motivation to accomplish things. The problem is in our society, we live in an unnatural situation where we're getting dopamine in high doses that shouldn't be there. Now, we also have a study that shows the brain actually acclimates to high doses of dopamine. So when your brain receives, your brain has like a sender of dopamine, right? And your neurotransmitters have a receiver. We call it dopamine receptors. There's about 5 of them as far as I know. So what happens is if your brain is getting too much dopamine, your brain will actually close off these receptors, limiting the amount of dopamine that comes in. Now, my interpretation of this is the brain is acclimating to a situation in a healthy way, right? There's dopamine coming in and it limits it. But what I think the brain doesn't account for is the person will increase the dose. Now, if the dose stays the same reaction will happen with less dopamine. But in people's behavior, they increase the dose, which increases the amount of dopamine, right? And that's kind of where the addictive property happens, is people wanting more just to get that same reaction. And the brain is trying to close off these receptors, so it requires more to come in. So the brain is actually helping you, but the behavior of people is actually making it worse, right? So that's where a big problem comes in. Now, we have substance addiction, right? That one is pretty common knowledge. Many people know about all of the substances. What I want to discuss are the behavioral addictions. Now, we have a book called the DSM, and I believe right now we're in the 5th edition of the DSM. And this book is essentially the way doctors can standardize the diagnosis. So if one doctor is diagnosing a patient, the other doctor can have a really good idea of what that means when somebody's been diagnosed based on this book. Some people don't like this book, but that's not for this video. So anyway, there's only one behavioral addiction in the DSM at the moment, and that's gambling. Gambling is a behavioral addiction. And what does that mean? That means there's a biological component to this. It's not just psychological. So talking to people and trying to tell them to stop doesn't really do it. That's not gonna fix the problem because there's a chemical motivator for this behavior, right? So yelling at people, telling them to stop is not gonna get you the results you want, because it's not just psychological. So fixing it psychologically doesn't help. It will help in conjunction with other things, but that alone really doesn't get the results of helping people with their problems. So I'm not really here to talk about gambling, although I do really wish I knew about this when I was younger, because this is important to me and this affected me in my life personally quite significantly. But anyway, what I want to talk about is the DSM considering other behavioral addictions. Now, they're not official, but they're considering an eating addiction, a porn addiction, internet gaming addiction, and just an internet addiction. And that's what I want to focus on right now, is the internet addiction. Now, again, this is not classified, but it could very well be soon. And that's kind of why it's important. Because it's not classified as an actual addiction at the moment, doctors are not going to help you. They're not going to use the DSM to give you a diagnosis, and you're not going to get support from doctors and any services that treat addiction. So it really relies on you to take care of this yourself. That's so important to know. And this is where strength of character comes into play, right? Strengthening who you are and strengthening your character and conquering this emotional regulator in your brain that controls you and compels you to have behaviors that you don't even want, right? It really takes this strength of character to overcome this, and it's so essential in life. So really understand the science here and understand that there's a lot to it. And this internet addiction, there's been some studies I want to talk about. Two particular studies of mice. One where they hooked up an electrode that stimulates the central amygdala, right? And the mouse has two levers to push, and they're both going to give a pebblet or a pebble of sucrose. One of them is just the sucrose, and the other one is the sucrose with the stimulus of the amygdala. And they're going to measure which one the mouse chooses, right? And it's often choosing the one with the stimulus. The study that I like more is another study where they hooked up an electrode that stimulates the dopamine of this mouse. And they hooked it up to this little bar, right? And every time the mouse pushes this bar, it's gonna stimulate the brain in that specific area to give it that dopamine. And what they found is that this mouse will hit it thousands of times an hour. It's just gonna sit there hitting that dopamine. And what they found, and this is very important, what they found is that mouse did not care as much for food. It just kept going for the dopamine. It didn't care as much for love, right? Even if there was a female mouse, it's just focusing on the dopamine and sleep. It would just keep hitting that until it passed out, where it wasn't even awake anymore. But while it was awake, it would just keep hitting that dopamine. Now, this is a mouse. Now, it's not the same as a human brain, of course, that's obvious, but this behavior we can also see in people, right? People who are getting dopamine from the internet with their internet addiction, unofficial internet addiction, they're less likely to call up their friends to hang out because they're at home on their phone and they're good, they're taken care of, they got the dopamine, right? Also with love, the wife or the husband, right? They're getting dopamine from another source, but if you did not get the dopamine from the internet, you might maybe go to your wife to get the dopamine there. More attention to the wife, right? More conversations, more fun, more activities. But if the dopamine is coming from somewhere else, and if it's more from somewhere else than it is your wife, then maybe the attention goes more to that source, right? And also with sleeping. People are not sleeping well because they're just getting hits of dopamine and they're not sleeping well. And that has a whole list of detrimental effects on your health. So let's say this is gonna be a long video. I know I can't make these videos short. They're just too crazy. But I'm hoping you learned something. I really hope that you understand there's a biological component to this. And even though it's unofficial, but it's something to really be concerned about, the internet addiction, right? And you can see it in your family, you can see it in your friends. I see it everywhere, and it's bad. So I really, really hope that you guys study more about this topic and really improve your quality of life. All right? Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, enjoy life. Peace out.